Welcome to Bible study. This is the Bible study we are preparing for St. Michael's Lutheran Church in Portland, Oregon on the 26th of May, the festival of the Holy Trinity this year. Before we get started on our topic for today, I just want to talk a little bit about where we're going from here. You can see the beautiful rhododendron behind me. Summer is upon us. We are nearing the end of our study of Luke's book of Acts, and where do we go from here? Someone has proposed they would really like to see us do something a little more topical, in which they would topics would be proposed and that we would do a Bible study on a topic inside some of the things that we believe, maybe some of the things we find hard to believe, or just things we find difficult or interesting or even strange about God. I rather enjoyed that idea, and so I'm going to suggest that maybe over the next few weeks we gather together a few ideas of what you would really like to know more about. You can simply email them to me. You could also let me know in church on Sunday. But what would be of interest to you? This could be a one-time study. It could be something that went over a couple of weeks or 3 or 4 weeks, but a topic or a subject that you would find very interesting. We'll still do it as a Bible study. We're going to listen to what God's Word says about it, but we want to perhaps do it more topically, systematically that way. Let's get into this. We're in chapter 24 of the book of Acts. It's been a couple of weeks since we have been doing this. I've had a wonderful vacation. I had a great time. Thank you very much for that opportunity. When we left off, Paul had come into Jerusalem, and a mob had formed and had seized him in the temple and were trying to kill him. And it was only through the intervention of the Roman centurions and the tribune that he was saved. When a plot was revealed that was seeking to kill him, he was whisked away by a large contingent of soldiers to the governor's fortress and palace, which was on the coast in a place called Caesarea. And there Paul was held. He was put into, we think the way Luke describes it, a sort of house arrest. We pick up the story with what happens next, and that is that the Jewish leaders in chapter 24, after 5 days, so with some speed, the high priest Ananias came down with some elders and a spokesman, one Tertullus. Now that's a really interesting move on their part. They've effectively hired a lawyer. In the ancient world, courts worked a little bit differently than they do in our world. We primarily have a court system, particularly a criminal court system, in which an individual who has been wronged doesn't bring the case. They come to the police assess and bring it to a prosecutor. Maybe a grand jury gets involved depending on what's happening, but it's really the state that prosecutes criminal activity that is in the hands of the prosecutor. In the ancient world, they didn't really have prosecutors. They simply said that, well, these things are illegal, and if somebody has done this, and you can prove somebody has done this, they will be fined, punished, whatever. But they didn't really have an arm of the state which did that. You really had to hire your own prosecutor, and that seems to be what these guys have done. They have hired somebody, interestingly, Tertullus. That's not a Jewish name. This seems to have been a Roman, somebody, an expert in Roman law. And so they were up in the game just a little bit over some of the things they have done before. They are going to bring a case against this Paul, this Saul of Tarsus, and they are going to ask the Roman government to say that what he has done is illegal. When he had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse Paul, saying, Since through you we enjoy much peace, and since your foresight, most excellent Felix, reforms are being made for this nation in every way and everywhere, we accept this with all gratitude. Now you're listening to good Roman legal rhetoric. The first thing he does is he butters up the judge. In the ancient world, this was a common practice. Now you have to remember that they don't have a separation of powers like we have in the United States today. They don't have a judicial branch and an executive branch and a legislative branch. All of those things were really collapsed into the emperor. And as an appointee of the emperor, Felix was really both governor and judge and legislator in many respects for this local community over which he was appointed a governor. And so the attorney is saying, well, you've enacted all of these reforms. That would be kind of a legislative function. And you have brought us peace. That's kind of an executive function. He's wrapping up the whole of Felix's governorship. All right, he's praising him across the board for that. You wouldn't normally do that in one of our courts today. And if you tried to do something like that, you would probably be met with some suspicion and the like, because judges aren't responsible for those things. They're simply there to interpret the law in this kind of a situation. But to detain you no further, okay, so let's get to the point. I beg you in your kindness to hear us briefly. We have found this man a plague, one who stirs up riots among all the Jews throughout the world and is a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple, but we seized him. By examining him yourself, you will be able to find out from him about everything of which we accuse him. All right, so this is their charge, that Paul is a troublemaker. He is a plague upon this society. He is causing civil unrest. And that really was something the Romans would react to. They did not like civil unrest. It made collecting taxes difficult. And so that was something that would get the attention of a Roman governor. The Jews also joined in this charge. In other words, the people that were actually bringing the suit joined into it. But you have to really think of this. This is much more akin to a civil suit than it is to a criminal case. And when you are in a civil suit, the only way you can bring a civil suit is if you prove you have been harmed. And it was kind of that way in the ancient world. That's going to come up in just a moment. When the governor had nodded, he turned and for him to speak, Paul replied. Paul doesn't have an attorney. They don't appoint you one in the ancient world. He has to defend himself. Knowing that for many years you've been a judge over this nation, I cheerfully make my defense. Okay, I'm confident in you, Felix, because you know this people, you know this religion, you know what's going on here. You can verify that it is not more than 12 days since I went up to worship in Jerusalem. I've only been here 12 days. They did not find me disputing with anyone or stirring up a crowd, either in the temple or in the synagogues or in the city. I have not done these things which they... Now, have those things happened elsewhere outside of Felix's jurisdiction? Luke has said, yes, sometimes Demetrius and others in these other cities, there have been occasions where things like that have happened. Paul hasn't been doing any of that here. And in fact, Luke has been at pains to tell you that Paul is not stirring up this. So much of what's led up to this point in this book has been to verify what Paul just said right here. Paul is not a troublemaker. Sometimes trouble boils out around him, but he's not the one making it. It's been the reaction of others who have misunderstood what he has said, who have an animus against him, who have a self-interest, like in the case of those people who had the slave girl that he cast out the demon. He cost them money, or Demetrius, he was causing him to lose income. Those people have stirred up trouble. Hasn't ever been Paul. Neither can they prove to you what they now bring up against me. But this I confess to you, that according to the way which they call a sect, I worship the God of our fathers, believing everything laid down by the law and written in the prophets. Now, Paul has done something really adroit here. He has said, this is not a legal dispute. This has not anything to do with the Roman law. This has something to do with the way Jewish people interpret their own scriptures. I am asserting that I am interpreting my Bible. And they are interpreting the Bible differently, and they're disagreeing with me. This isn't really a Roman civil case. If you remember, now, a little bit of precedent, that was exactly what Gallio had said about Paul back in chapter 18, when Paul was in Corinth. Remember, with Sosthenes. Having a hope in God, which these men themselves accept, that there will be a resurrection of both the just and the unjust. So these are Pharisees he's talking to here. So I always take pains to have a clear conscience toward both God and man. Now, after several years, I came to bring alms to my nation and to present offerings. I came to worship God, and I came to give. I came to do a beneficial thing. I came to bring relief to the poor, and he was, in fact, doing that. While I was doing this, they found me purified in the temple. Remember, Luke told you he had taken a vow, and with these other guys paid for their purification as well. Without any crowd, there was no tumult. I was in church. But some Jews from Asia, they ought to be here before you and to make this accusation, should they have anything against me. In other words, that what Paul has just said is these guys actually don't have standing in the court. They're not the ones who are actually raising the claim. This is hearsay, would be one way that we talk about it today, or that they are not actually the aggrieved party. They are simply people who have been maybe angry at what I did, but I didn't hurt them. It's the people who started this riot that you need to talk to. Or else let these men themselves say what is wrongdoing they have found when I stood before the council. Right? What did they say that I did wrong? They can't tell you anything because they didn't see me do anything wrong. Other than this one thing. Okay, maybe I was a little over the top when I cried out while standing among them. It is with respect to the resurrection of the dead that I'm on trial before you today. And if you remember, that did cause a bit of a stir when Paul was there. There's Paul's defense. But Felix, having a rather accurate knowledge of the way, okay, so he knew about Christianity. This was not a new thing for him. He put them off. He said, not yet. When Lysias the tribune comes down, I will decide your case. So Lysias was the guy who had rescued Paul when he was in Jerusalem. He wants to get some firsthand information. He doesn't just want the hearsay or the people involved telling him what's going on. He wants an independent witness. He gave orders to the centurion that Paul should be kept in custody but have some liberty, and that none of his friends should be prevented from attending to his needs. In other words, they lock him up, but he's locked up in a place where his friends can come and see him, and he's even got some freedom. He can walk about to things. Who knows what that all means. After some days, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, and he sent for Paul and heard him speak about faith in Christ Jesus. So Felix says, tell me more about this Jesus. And as Paul reasoned about righteousness and self-control and the coming judgment, and so you see Paul saying, well, there's a right and there's a wrong, isn't there? Self-control. That was actually, at the time when Paul said this, a very in vogue idea inside Roman aristocracy. Many of them were, in fact, Stoics. The great advisor to the emperor at the time, to whom Paul is about to appeal, is the Stoic philosopher Seneca. And Stoicism believes, highly values self-control, that you don't go off half-cocked. You don't do things out of your passions or your urges or your rages, but you do things reasonably and rationally. And he also talked to him about the coming judgment, that there is someone to whom we are accountable to. Felix was alarmed. Apparently, Paul got a little close here. And he said, "Go away for the present. When I get an opportunity, I will summon you." At the same time, Felix was hoping that money would be given to him by Paul. He's hoping for a bribe or some sort of something to grease the wheels of this process. So he sent for him often and conversed with him for 2 full years. Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and desiring to do the Jews a favor, Felix didn't release Paul. Apparently, at the change of governorship, oftentimes these prisons would be empty. These people who were held in trial would be released. But that didn't happen because Paul was just a little too hot to handle. 3 days after Festus arrived, we're in chapter 25 now, in the province, he went up to Jerusalem. He did his due diligence. He got there. He showed up in the capital city, the hotbed of Jewish rebellion, if there was going to be one. And the chief priests and the principal men of the Jews laid out their case against Paul. They said, "What are we going to deal with this? It's been 2 years." They urged him, asking a favor against Paul, that Festus would summon him to Jerusalem, because they were planning an ambush to kill him on the way. Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea. Yeah, that's where he is, and there's a reason for that. Apparently, maybe Felix had let him know. So he said, "Let men of authority among you go down with me, and if there's anything wrong about this man, let them bring charges against him." And he stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days. He went down to Caesarea, and the next day he took a seat in the tribune, and he ordered Paul to be brought. Let's leave it there. Paul's defense in front of Festus really deserves more than we have time to be able to do right now. But one more little point just to bring out. When Paul addresses Felix back in chapter 24, he calls him most excellent Felix. That is exactly the same phrase used to describe the recipient of this book, most excellent Theophilus. It can be reasoned according to the text that in fact everything leading up to this in this book regarding Paul has been to really say that the things that Paul is saying here in his defense are in fact true. He has not been causing trouble. He has been, in fact, talking religion and talking about the interpretation of the Old Testament. And he has, in fact, yes, been surrounded by controversy. But it is a controversy which is rooted in the misunderstanding of Paul, in the self-interest of certain people, and just sometimes in the sheer irrationality. Right? And so remember, Paul is talking to Festus to Felix about self-control. And so many of the people who were raging against Paul, Luke is depicted as having no self-control. What does that mean for us today as people who are reading this? What have we learned? Luke has told us something about the opponents of Paul, about the people who have been been the enemies of the spread of the gospel. What does it say about our enemies? And what do we know about how to react to them? I think Luke is asking us to have a certain generosity to them, to acknowledge that a lot of times it's born out of a misunderstanding. It may be born out of real needs, fears, desires, and that they need to have a little bit of compassion from us. That the one who is your enemy, Sosthenes, is simply a friend who doesn't know it yet. I look forward to talking more with you about this. We will see you on Sunday, and God bless you. It's good to be home.